Yo, what is good, everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy Podcast. My name is Tyler Anderson. I am your host. I'm recording this on December 7th, Saturday morning. This is episode 29, and we are going to be getting into my Week 14 2024 starts of the week. Before we do that, though, please make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are enjoying the Fantasy Football Prodigy Podcast so that you can stay tuned, stay up to date with all the new episodes so that you too can become a fantasy football prodigy. If you do want video for the podcast, if you want to see a very sleep deprived individual talk about football, want to see that ugly mug, just look up Fantasy Football Prodigy over on YouTube and you can see me. Hello everybody. So we're going to go position by position for my top starts of the week for week 14. And we're going to start with the quarterback position here, okay? So I'm going to start with my streamer of the week. I don't normally distinguish a streamer versus a start of the week, but this week I decided to do one outright start of the week and one stream of the week. So my week 14 stream of the week, quarterback Russell Wilson of the Pittsburgh Steelers at home versus the Cleveland Browns. Russ has been very solid for fantasy since taking over as the starting quarterback for the Steelers back in week 7. Fresh off a 400-yard and 3 touchdown performance against the Bengals in week 13, Wilson gets a decent matchup in week 14 against the Cleveland Browns. He disappointed in this same matchup just 2 weeks ago in week 12, but remember, that game was played in a blizzard. There is some rain and wind in the forecast as of this recording, so monitor the news up until game time to make sure the weather isn't bad enough to limit the passing attack. But assuming non-terrible weather, Russ is a great low quarterback one streaming candidate in week 14. Now we're going to move on to my actual start of the week here. So quarterback start of the week, Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Bucks at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders. I made Baker my quarterback start of the week last week against the Panthers, and he disappointed quite a bit with Bucky Irving and the rushing attack taking that game over. With that being said, Baker Mayfield is the quarterback 5 in points per game on the season, and I am not going away from him in this awesome matchup after one bad week where the ball just happened to move on the ground more than in the air. Baker Mayfield is in a great spot in week 14 against the Raiders. This game has a 46-point over-under. The Raiders give up the 8th most points per game to quarterbacks on the season. Wide receiver Mike Evans is back from injury and looking healthy, and this is also a good matchup for his other top receiving option, tight end Cade Otten. Bucky Irving at running back is listed as questionable as of this recording, and a limited or inactive Bucky Irving only increases how much the offense will need to rely on the passing game. On top of all of that, the Bucs defense is terrible, and I think even the questionable Raiders offense will have a chance to keep up and force the Bucs to score in this game. Baker Mayfield is a mid to high quarterback one start in week 14. Now, normally I go to the running back position after I talk about my quarterback start of the week, but I am stacking my wide receiver start of the week with my quarterback start of the week, and there might even be another stack at tight end. You'll have to wait and see. I might have already mentioned both of these players. So we're going to move on to wide receiver. I got one wide receiver start of the week for you because I'm really confident, and this is the only start of the week I need. Wide receiver start of the week, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Like I just said, I love Baker Mayfield this week at quarterback, and Mike Evans is his number one target in the passing game. Mike Evans looked like the same old dominant Mike through the first 7 weeks of the season before he suffered that hamstring injury, causing him to miss 3 games. He came back from injury after the team's Week 11 bye to the tune of 5 receptions for 68 yards on only 60% of snaps. The following week, last week, his targets and snap percentage jumped up. and he had 8 receptions for 118 yards and a touchdown on 12 targets and 84% of snaps. While we love that final stat line, the behind the scenes target and stat metrics are what I really find especially encouraging, as it shows he is healthy enough to be on the field and not be limited. Mike Evans has had 1,000 receiving yards in every single season of his career that began all the way back in 2014. The year is 2024 for those of you who are keeping track here. I think he and the team want that streak to continue, and in order to do that, he will need to average 95.8 yards per game over the final 5 games of the season. Now, the Bucs are still alive for the playoffs, and while they will prioritize winning above anything else and any stats until that fact changes, I still think the offense would be smart to force feed the ball to Mike Evans, especially with the absence of fellow wide receiver Chris Godwin for the rest of the season. Mike Evans is a mid wide receiver 1 start in week 14. We're going to move on to the tight end position. I got another stack for you. Tight end start of the week, Cade Otten of the Tampa Bay Bucs at home versus the Las Vegas Raiders. When both wide receiver Mike Evans and wide receiver Chris Godwin went down with injury back in week 7, tight end Cade Otten took on extra involvement in the passing game, and he was an absolute stud, must-start tight end in fantasy football. However, since Mike Evans came back in week 12, Otten hasn't been so great, but I think he gets back on track in week 14 against the Raiders. This is a dream matchup for Cade Otten, as the Raiders give up the 3rd most points per game to tight ends on the season, and there arguably is not a single team you would want your tight end to play against right now, just based on more recent metrics. I think Baker Mayfield has a great performance in this game at quarterback, and that will likely require Cade Otten to be heavily involved. Unless you have a locked in stud at the tight end position, I think we give Cade Otten 1 more week before bailing. If he fails again in this spot, I will start to be very, very worried about his rest of season production. But for week 14, I think he gets back on track and he is a low tight end 1 start. Those are the end of my stacks. No more Buccaneers talk. Okay. We spent 75% of the players talking about the Tampa Bay Bucs. So if they disappoint, I'm kind of screwed here. But we're gonna move on to the running back position, ladies and gentlemen. But before we do that, please remember to follow or subscribe wherever you are enjoying the podcast. Make sure to drop a like if you're on the YouTube, or if you can like wherever you're enjoying, and leave a comment or a review. All good things, hopefully. Well, maybe wait to see if I get these calls right, and then you can leave your review. But I digress. We're going to move on to the running back position here. So my first running back start of the week, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals on the road against the Dallas Cowboys. If you haven't noticed, Chase Brown has been on an absolute tear lately as the Bengals lead back. Since week 9, Chase Brown is the running back 5 in points per game in all of fantasy. That's ahead of guys like Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, James Cook, Alvin Kamara, Kyren Williams, and Breece Hall. Now in week 14, he gets to take on the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday Night Football in a game that has an amazing 49.5 point over-under. While I think we all expect the Bengals to score a ton of points on offense, as they have been doing a lot lately, the Bengals defense is so bad that I foresee the Cowboys, even with Cooper Rush, the backup quarterback in there, I expect them to put up points on the board as well, creating a good game script where both offenses are producing fantasy football goodness. You should be playing Brown regardless of matchup at this point, but I wanted to highlight him this week because the Cowboys are giving up the 4th most points per game to running backs on the season, and I think he could really have a huge performance in this game, especially if it hits the over. Chase Brown is a mid running back 1 play in week 14. He might just win your week. We'll see, but he's been awesome lately. Moving on, I have 2 more running back starts of the week. So Chase Brown is the guy that he's been there. He's the solid commodity. but I like him in like a potential blow up spot here. I'm going to go with two guys who you shouldn't have started all season. Maybe one of them you started, but hopefully not. Because these guys are stepping up into new opportunities that they just didn't have before. But in fantasy football, things change, injuries happen. That's why it is important to roster handcuff running backs, especially late in the season. You know, once your starting lineup gets to be a little more finalized and bye weeks aren't as big of an issue, although there have been some pretty bad bye week situations in week 12 and 14 here. But you know, obviously it's easy to say. I know, you need guys to start. You don't want to drop good players, and you can't roster every handcuff, but it just shows the value of rostering a handcuff. And I guess technically this first guy I'm going to mention, he wasn't actually the handcuff. He was the third stringer, but the starter and the running back both went down in the same week. So enough dilly-dally. Here he is. Running back start of the week, Isaac Guerendo of the San Francisco 49ers at home versus the Chicago Bears. With Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason both out, Isaac Guerendo will be the starting running back for the 49ers in week 14 and beyond. Guerendo has insane elite level speed, and I made sure to stash him on my Dynasty Taxi Squad, especially since I am the CMC manager in my Dynasty League. Well, I was pretty bummed out when I dropped then third stringer running back Jordan Mason and watched him dominate for someone else after a second string running back Elijah Mitchell and then starting running back Christian McCaffrey both went down. And then, of course, all CMC managers were super bummed when he recently got placed on injured reserve after he finally came back from missing most of the season. But here we are. Isaac Guerendo is the starter, and that's just life now. I am relying heavily on Guerendo in my Dynasty League, and I think he is a really solid play this week. He takes on the Chicago Bears, who are really tough on passing games, but are actually an above average matchup for running backs. This is a great opportunity for an interesting young rookie prospect with special physical traits in a must-win game for the Niners. Kyle Shanahan running backs always produce for fantasy, and we've seen backups come in recent years for his offense and help win people fantasy championships. My Dynasty team hopes that trend continues with Guerendo, and I think it all starts in week 14. I like him as a solid running back 2 play. And then we got another handcuff now, likely starting running back. Running back start of the week, Braelon Allen of the New York Jets on the road against the Miami Dolphins. Breece Hall is listed as doubtful as of this recording, and he is likely ruled out by the time you are listening to this. That means rookie running back Braelon Allen will take over as the starter for the Jets in week 14, with fellow rookie running back Isaiah Davis also a candidate to see some work in this game. We still don't know what the split is going to look like, but Braelon Allen projects to lead that backfield. Allen has seen limited work behind superstar running back Breece Hall so far this season, but he has flashed at times on some of his touches. I have wondered all season what a full workload would look like for Allen, and now we'll actually get a chance to see that in a solid matchup against the Dolphins. The Dolphins give up the 11th most points per game to running backs on the season, and they have been extra generous to running backs lately, giving up extra rushing production, just kind of falling apart a little bit. Braelon Allen is a solid running back 2 start in week 14. So we went over quarterback, we went over running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Really quick, before we head out, ladies and gentlemen, quick defensive overview for week 14 here. I don't have any notes or anything listed, but just taking a quick glance at the defenses here. Steelers at home versus Jameis Winston. Look, I'm starting Jameis Winston in one of my leagues with Bo Nix on bye, just because he can light it up. But even if he does light it up, there's very high odds that he throws some interceptions, and pretty high odds that at least one of them is a pick six, just, relative to what pick six odds are. Like last week, he had 2, right? He had 2 pick sixes last week, I'm pretty sure. Almost 3 if that defender was faster at the end of the game. So I think the Steelers are a solid play. The Eagles have looked great lately. They get to take on the Panthers. I think Saquon Barkley is just going to dominate this week. Obviously I'm not going to make Saquon Barkley like a start of the week because you should be starting him each and every week regardless. I don't make these videos to tell you the absolute obvious. I recommended Cortland Sutton last week, and someone on my TikTok was like, "Oh yeah, thanks, bud." I'm like, "Hey man, before the season, I couldn't get like a second round pick for Cortland Sutton in my dynasty league. Let's not act like he's this household name all of a sudden, because you know what I mean." So, anyways, I digress. Eagles, even though Bryce Young has been playing better, the Eagles are at home. They should have the lead with Saquon dominating, and I think they're a solid play. You got the Vikings at home versus Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. It's a revenge game for Kirk Cousins, but he's looked really bad lately, and the Vikings defense is tremendous. They shut down the run. Obviously, Bijan Robinson is a talented running back, but they're a solid play still. And I definitely think they're going to get to Kirk Cousins and maybe get an interception or two there. The Saints against the Giants. I mean, that's the Giants are always a good matchup, and Malik Neighbors is questionable as of this recording. So, if he's out, that makes it an even better play because he's their best player on offense. But even if he's active, I still like the matchup. The Tampa Bay Bucks against the Raiders. The Bucks defense is terrible, but the Raiders offense is also pretty terrible. They kept up with the Chiefs, although that was kind of a lower scoring game last week. But I'm starting the Bucks in a league. You got the Titans against Mac Jones, the backup quarterback, and the Jacksonville Jags. That's solid. You got the Niners at home versus the Bears. There's not a lot of like plays that I really love this week, but that's another solid one. You got the Cardinals. Their defense has been playing pretty well against Seattle. I don't love that matchup, but just with bye weeks and how things shake out, they're an okay start. And then I guess the last one that I'd be somewhat comfortable with Dolphins at home versus the Jets without Breece Hall. I'm not a huge fan of that. But if you're desperate, you could. So those are kind of my my top defensive plays. And then really quick, I said last week that we're going to keep doing this. So even though, week 13 wasn't great for me for my calls, we are going to go over my starts of the week. So for week 13, sorry, I introduced that very weird. We're going to recap last week's start of the weeks just to see where we went wrong. So my week 13 quarterback start of the week was Baker Mayfield. He was the quarterback 28 according to Fantasy Pro scoring. I think Baker Mayfield, I would always play him in that matchup. And a lot of the production just, went to the running backs. So it's tough, but I'm sticking with him another week, obviously, as I made him a start of the week. Chuba Hubbard was my running back start of the week, and he was terrible. He had 2.3 points in half PPR. He just didn't get it done. Jonathan Brooks was a little more involved, but it was an anomaly. Of course I made him a start of the week, and he goes out and has his worst game of the season probably. Since was that his worst game of the season? It probably was, unless he was worse in week 1 or 2. Yeah, week 1 he had 1.4 points. And then this was his second lowest of the season. So, now he gets to Eagles. That's a tough matchup. So you might be forced to start him. He's a good player, but it just didn't work out last week. Cortland Sutton was my wide receiver start of the week. He was pretty solid. 13.2 points. We'll take that. Wide receiver 24 on the week and half PPR. That is very, very solid. And then Taysom Hill, he was my tight end start of the week. He had 7.2 points before tearing his ACL. So, 7.2 out of your tight end. I mean, it's not great, but, tight ends often bust. And he, obviously left early with an ACL tear. He had 7 targets in the game, had 5 carries on the ground. So, I mean, the usage was there. But, obviously ACL tear, that's really tough. So, and he's an older player, so we'll see what his future holds there. But anyways, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Let's hope we do better this week on our starts of the week than last week. Get back on track because we've been making good calls all season. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're enjoying the podcast. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one. Good luck to everyone except your opponents in week 14. Peace.